I came to fix her fence. Just another job in a small town where nothing happens. But when Serena looked at me, her eyes held a question too dangerous to answer. What she said next would haunt me for years. I never imagined that a routine roofing job could unravel my life like a loose thread, but that's how it all began for me. At 23, I was Nolan Hargrove, scraping by in the quiet town of Milford, Connecticut, taking whatever handyman gigs came my way. I'd dropped out of community college a year earlier, much to my parents' disappointment, preferring the feel of tools in my hands over lectures in stuffy classrooms. That late September afternoon, the sky hung low and heavy, bruised with impending storm clouds, when I got the call from Serena Voss. She lived at the end of Elmwood Lane, in one of those grand old Victorian homes with steep roofs and intricate gingerbread trim that seemed to hold on to the past a little too tightly. A friend from the hardware store, Mr. Jenkins, had passed along her number, warning me about the urgency. "Leak's bad, son," he'd grumbled, scribbling her address on a scrap of paper. "And that storm's rolling in fast." I loaded my beat-up truck with fresh shingles, rolls of tar paper, a sturdy ladder, and a few extra nails, just in case. The first distant rumble of thunder echoed as I drove out of town, the road winding through clusters of maple trees already hinting at autumn's fire. Elmwood Lane was a secluded stretch, flanked by overgrown fields and the occasional farmhouse, leading to her place like a forgotten path. When I arrived, rain was starting to patter against the windshield, light but insistent. Serena opened the door almost immediately, as if she'd been pacing nearby. She was taller than I'd expected, with dark hair swept into a casual bun that let a few strands escape, framing her face. Her eyes were a deep hazel, carrying a quiet depth that made me pause. She appeared to be in her late 30s, around 38 perhaps, with the kind of effortless grace that came from navigating life's harder turns. Lines etched faintly around her mouth, and eyes suggested stories she kept to herself, and her simple sweater and jeans did nothing to hide a figure that spoke of quiet confidence. I looked away quickly, focusing on my boots. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, her voice calm and measured, like someone used to speaking in hushed library tones. "The leak's up in the attic, right above the guest room. It's been getting worse with every rain." "No trouble at all, ma'am," I replied, wiping my feet on the welcome mat before stepping into the warmth of her home. The air carried the comforting scent of brewed coffee mixed with something soothing, like chamomile from a recent cup of tea. The interior was neat, but inviting, with tall bookshelves crammed with novels and a few scattered knickknacks, mostly nature prints and a single vase of dried wildflowers. No family photos caught my eye, just empty frames on the mantel that hinted at absences. She guided me up the creaking wooden stairs, her movements efficient yet unhurried, and pointed to the dark water stains blooming across the ceiling like ink blots. "I tried taping it up myself, but I'm hopeless with ladders and heights." I nodded, unfolding my ladder and climbing up to poke at the damp plaster. The roof above was ancient, shingles warped and lifting at the edges from years of neglect. Outside, the wind was picking up, whipping rain against the small attic window. "This'll need a proper patch," I called down. "I'll have to get on the roof and replace a section. Should take a couple of hours, but with the storm building, I'll move fast." She stood at the ladder's base, arms folded across her chest, glancing out at the darkening sky. "Please be careful. The forecast mentioned high winds and possible hail. I don't want you getting hurt up there." Her concern felt genuine, not just polite, and I flashed what I hoped was a confident smile. "I've handled worse weather. Rain's no match for good prep." But inside, a flicker of doubt stirred. The storm felt angrier than usual. Climbing out onto the roof was like stepping into chaos. Gusts tugged at my jacket, rain slicking the shingles underfoot, making every step a calculated risk. Lightning forked in the distance, illuminating the blurred outline of Milford below. I worked steadily, ripping away the damaged layers, spreading tar paper, and nailing down new shingles with rhythmic hammers. My fingers grew numb from the cold, water dripping down my collar. But I pushed through, thoughts drifting to simpler things like the hot meal I'd grab later at the diner on Harlow Street. From below, faint sounds drifted up, her footsteps pacing the attic, perhaps brewing more tea to combat the chill invading the house. An hour in, the storm unleashed its full fury. Thunder boomed like cannon fire, shaking the roof beneath me, and hail began to pepper down, first pea-sized, then larger, stinging my exposed skin like angry bees. I gripped the roof's ridge, heart slamming in my chest, when her voice cut through the roar from the open window. "Nolan! Get down from there! It's not safe anymore!" "Almost finished!" I yelled back, hammering frantically at the last shingle. But she was right. Visibility was gone, the wind threatening to hurl me off. I scrambled for the ladder, a gust slamming it askew just as I reached it. I leaped the final feet, landing in the muddy backyard with a jolt that jarred my knees. Grabbing my scattered tools, I bolted for the porch, rain pounding my back. She flung the door open, her face etched with worry, pulling me inside. "Come in. You're soaked through." Water pooled at my feet on her polished hardwood, and I mumbled apologies, shivering now that the adrenaline was fading. "Don't worry about the floor," she said, fetching a thick towel from a hall closet and pressing it into my hands. "The roof, is it okay?" "Patched solid," I assured her, toweling my hair and face. "It'll hold through this mess." She nodded, glancing out at the raging storm, branches thrashing, lightning carving the sky. "Sit. I'll brew some fresh coffee to warm you up." I hesitated, my truck keys heavy in my pocket, but the warmth of her home wrapped around me like a blanket. Thunder rattled the windows, and I sank into a kitchen chair, watching her move with quiet efficiency. The kitchen was a cozy haven, with a large oak table scarred from years of use, herb pots lining the windowsill, and a faint aroma of baked goods lingering from earlier. She poured 2 mugs, steam rising in lazy curls, and sat across from me, her own hands cradling the warmth. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" "Since high school, off and on," I said, sipping the hot liquid gratefully. "Pays the bills while I figure out the rest." She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "And what's the rest for you?" I shrugged, feeling exposed under her gaze. "Maybe my own repair business someday. Nothing fancy, just steady." "That's ambitious," she replied, her tone encouraging. "This town could use more reliable hands like yours." We talked sporadically as the storm howled, the conversation light, but laced with an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. She mentioned moving here 5 years ago after her divorce, seeking the solitude of Elmwood Lane. "The quiet helps," she said softly, staring into her mug. "But nights like this, the house feels emptier than usual." I nodded, understanding more than I let on. My own apartment above the laundromat on Tide Street often echoed with a similar hollowness. Glancing at my watch, it was well past 7. The roads likely flooded. Elmwood Lane dipped low in spots, turning into a shallow river during heavy rains. "I should try to head out," I said, standing reluctantly. She peered through the rain-streaked window. "The radio warned of flash floods on Route 12. Your way back, right? It's dangerous." She was right. The street outside was a swirling torrent. Before I could protest, she spoke again, her voice steady, but with a hint of vulnerability. "Stay here for the night. The guest room's dry now, thanks to you. I'd feel awful if something happened." The offer hung there, unexpected and charged. She was older, more composed, and I was just the guy with the ladder. It felt like stepping over an unspoken boundary, but logic and something deeper won out. "If you're sure it's no imposition." "None at all," she said, rising to rinse the mugs. "I'll find you some dry clothes. My ex left a few things that might fit." "They're clean." As she headed upstairs, I sat there, the fire she'd lit in the living room crackling softly, casting flickering shadows. The house groaned under the wind's assault, and I wondered if this was mere hospitality, or if the storm had stirred something else. She returned with a soft flannel shirt and gray sweatpants, handing them over with a quick glance. "Bathroom's first door on the left. Take your time." I changed in the small, tiled room, the clothes a tad loose but comforting, their faint scent of laundry soap grounding me. Back in the living room, she'd stoked the fire higher, the warmth seeping into my chilled bones. We settled on the couch, not too close, talking about Milford's quirks, the annual fair on the town green, her role at the public library organizing story hours for kids. I shared mishaps from past jobs, like the time I painted a barn door the wrong shade of red, and she laughed, a genuine melodic sound that eased the tension but sparked another kind. As the hours ticked by, the storm unrelenting, she suggested Scrabble to kill time, pulling a worn box from a shelf. We played by the fire's glow, tiles clacking softly. Storm, refuge, linger. Her fingers grazed mine once when we both reached for the bag, and she withdrew quickly, a subtle color rising in her cheeks. "My mistake," she murmured. "It's fine," I said. But the room felt warmer, the air thicker with unspoken possibilities. By midnight, fatigue set in, and she stretched with a yawn. "I think it's time to call it a night. Sheets are fresh in the guest room." I helped dampen the fire, embers glowing faintly as we climbed the stairs. A deafening thunderclap shook the house, making her startle, and without thinking, I steadied her elbow. My hand lingered, her skin warm through the sleeve, and our eyes met in the dim hallway light, something raw and electric passing between us. "Good night, Serena," I whispered, pulling away. "Good night," she replied, her door clicking shut softly. In the guest bed, sheets crisp and cool, I lay awake, rain lashing the windows, my mind a whirlwind. She was beautiful in her quiet way, carrying a solitude that mirrored my own uncertainties. Being here felt wrong by some societal measure, yet undeniably right in the moment. Sleep came in fits, dreams fragmented by the storm's rage. Morning dawned gray and sodden, the scent of frying bacon drawing me downstairs. She was at the stove, humming a tune I didn't recognize, her hair still tousled from sleep. "Coffee's on," she said, plating eggs and toast with a faint smile that didn't quite mask a new awkwardness. We ate mostly in silence, my truck visible through the window, the floods receding. "Thank you for everything," I said, gathering my damp clothes. "Any time," she replied, her eyes holding mine a fraction longer, as if weighing words unsaid. Driving away, the house shrinking in my mirror, I felt a pull I couldn't explain, a sense that the storm had washed away more than just debris. This is just the beginning. You can't even imagine what she'll decide in a few hours. The week after that night felt like walking through fog, everything familiar but blurred, my thoughts circling back to Serena Voss and her house on Elmwood Lane. I was 23, Nolan Hargrove, a handyman piecing together a living in Milford, Connecticut, with no real plan beyond the next job. My days were filled with small repairs, tightening a loose porch rail on Cedar Street, unclogging a drain at the auto shop on Westfield Road, but none of it grounded me like it used to. I kept seeing her face in fleeting moments, the way her hazel eyes softened when she laughed, the accidental brush of her fingers during Scrabble, the quiet weight of her offer to stay. I told myself it was nothing, just a kind woman grateful for a patched roof, but the memory clung like the damp scent of rain on my jacket. I lived in a cramped apartment above Tide and Time, the laundromat on Vine Street, where the constant hum of dryers was my only company most nights. Lying there, staring at the cracked ceiling, I'd replay that evening. Her voice, the firelight, the way the storm seemed to trap us in a world of our own. It was foolish, I knew. She was pushing 40, a librarian with a life shaped by a divorce I could only guess at, and I was just a kid with a toolbox. But something about her felt like a door I wasn't supposed to open, yet couldn't stop reaching for. Wednesday evening, my phone lit up with a text from her number. "Nolan, it's Serena. Roof's fine, but the attic window's jammed shut now. Could you come by when you're free? No hurry." My heart kicked up a notch, fingers hovering over the screen. I waited an hour before replying, trying to seem casual. Saturday works. I'll swing by after lunch. Giving myself a few days felt safer, a chance to shake off the jittery anticipation that hit every time I thought of her. But the truth was, I wanted to go back sooner. Saturday came crisp and golden, the kind of autumn day that made Milford look like a postcard, with maples blazing along the roads. I pulled up to her house, toolbox rattling in the truck bed, and noticed her front garden looked neater, wildflowers trimmed back, a few new stakes for climbing roses. She answered the door in a navy cardigan and jeans, her dark hair loose, cascading over her shoulders in soft waves. Up close, her age was clearer, maybe 39, with fine lines framing her eyes that spoke of late nights and hard choices. But those details only made her more striking, like a painting you couldn't stop studying. "Thanks for coming again," she said, her voice warm but cautious, like she was measuring her words. "I hate to keep bothering you." "It's no bother," I said, following her inside. The house was the same, coffee and chamomile in the air, books stacked on every surface, the faint creak of old wood underfoot. She led me to the attic, a low-ceilinged space cluttered with cardboard boxes and a single dormer window that refused to budge. "Got stuck after the storm," she explained, pointing. "I tried prying it, but I'm not as strong as I think I am." I set up my tools, inspecting the swollen frame. "Wood's warped from the rain. I'll sand it down, get it moving again." As I worked, sanding the edges and testing the sash, she lingered nearby, leaning against a dusty beam. Her presence was distracting, not loud but heavy, like a current running under the floorboards. "You get a lot of calls like this?" she asked, brushing a cobweb from her sleeve. "Stuck windows? More than you'd expect," I said, grinning to ease the tension. "Old houses like this have a mind of their own. They fight back." She smiled, a real one that crinkled her eyes. "This place fights me every day. I bought it thinking I'd make it my own, new paint, new life. But it's stubborn." "Sounds like you're stubborn too," I said, glancing over. "Takes one to know one." Her laugh was soft, almost surprised, like she hadn't expected to enjoy the moment. We talked as I worked, the attic growing warmer despite the cool air seeping through the cracked window. She told me about her job at the Milford Public Library, how she loved curating book displays but dreaded the endless budget meetings. I shared stories of my worst jobs, like the time I accidentally wired a porch light to flicker like a strobe at the community center on Park Avenue. Her laughter filled the small space, and I caught myself watching her too long, noticing the way her hands moved when she talked, slender and deliberate, with a faint scar across one knuckle that begged a story I didn't dare ask for. The window slid open at last, letting in a rush of autumn air that smelled of leaves and distant rain. "Got it," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Should be fine now." She stepped closer to test it, her shoulder brushing mine in the tight attic. The contact sent a jolt through me, and I caught the faint lavender scent of her hair. "You're a miracle worker, Nolan," she said, peering out at the fiery maples across the lane. "This house would collapse without you." "Just doing my job," I replied, but her words landed deeper, stirring something I wasn't ready to name. I packed my tools, ready to head downstairs, when she stopped me with a light touch on my arm. "Stay for lunch?" "I made too much soup. Potato leek. Nothing fancy." I should have declined. I had a fence repair scheduled on Birchwood Drive, and lingering felt like tempting fate. But her eyes held a quiet invitation, and my resolve crumbled. "Soup sounds great," I said, following her to the kitchen. She ladled out steaming bowls, pairing them with thick slices of crusty bread from the bakery on Main Street. We sat at her weathered oak table, sunlight slanting through the window, painting her face in soft gold. Conversation flowed easily, local gossip about the new diner opening near Route 17, her favorite books, my half-formed dreams of starting a repair business. But there was a current beneath it, in the way she'd pause before speaking, or how I'd catch myself staring at the curve of her jaw. Her hands, stirring the soup, were graceful but worn, that scar catching the light again. I wanted to ask about it, about her, but the words felt too heavy. After lunch, she suggested showing me the backyard, where she'd been wrestling with her overgrown garden. We stepped outside, the air sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. She pointed out her struggling tomato plants, wilted from a late frost, and a row of basil that was somehow thriving. "I'm no gardener," she admitted, crouching to yank a stubborn weed, "but I keep trying, hoping something takes root." "You're persistent," I said, kneeling beside her to help. "That's half the battle." She glanced at me, her eyes catching mine, and time seemed to stutter. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint promise of rain, and neither of us moved. Her cardigan had slipped slightly, revealing a sliver of collarbone, and I forced my gaze away, focusing on the dirt under my nails. "You ever think about staying in Milford for good?" she asked, standing and brushing soil from her hands. "Sometimes," I said, rising too. "I like the work, the freedom, but it's a small town. Not sure it's big enough for what I want." "There's always something to fix here," she said, her voice softer now. "People need someone they can count on." The word reliable hit me again, like a stone dropped into still water. We walked back inside, the sky darkening with clouds, and I grabbed my toolbox, ready to leave. At the door, she paused, her hand resting on the frame, her eyes searching mine. "Nolan, I really appreciated you staying that night. It was comforting, not being alone." My throat tightened, her words pulling at something raw inside me. "It was nice for me too," I said, quieter than intended. Our gazes locked, and I saw a flicker of something. Doubt, longing. I couldn't tell. I wanted to ask what she meant, to stay longer, but the moment slipped away. "I'll check on the window in a few days," I said, stepping onto the porch. "Please do," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Driving back to Vine Street, her silhouette in the doorway lingered in my mind, sharp and vivid. That night, alone in my apartment, the laundromat's hum vibrating through the walls, I couldn't settle. I kept seeing her smile, feeling the ghost of her touch in the attic. She was just being kind, I told myself, grateful for the help. But the way her eyes held mine, the way the air shifted when we stood close, it wasn't just gratitude. I wanted to text her, find any excuse to go back, but I didn't. Instead, I lay awake, the weight of her words pressing against me, wondering why a simple window job felt like it was rewriting my life. What he'll say next will change everything, for her and for him. The days following that second visit dragged on like a slow-moving river, heavy with unspoken currents that pulled at me no matter how hard I tried to ignore them. I was Nolan Hargrove, 23 and adrift in Milford, Connecticut, piecing together a life from one repair job to the next. Work kept me moving, a gutter replacement at the old textile mill on Riverbend Road, staining a weathered deck for a retired couple on Oak Ridge Circle. But my mind wandered back to Serena Voss more often than I cared to admit. Her house on Elmwood Lane had become a landmark in my thoughts, a place where the air felt thicker, charged with possibilities I wasn't sure I wanted to explore. I'd catch myself driving by on detours, slowing just enough to glance at the Victorian silhouette against the autumn sky, wondering if she was inside, alone with her books and her quiet routines. It was ridiculous, I knew. She was nearly 40, a woman who'd built walls around her heart after a divorce that left scars I could only sense, and I was barely out of my teens, fumbling through adulthood with a toolbox and vague ambitions. Midweek, my phone buzzed during a lunch break, her name lighting up the screen. "Nolan, a branch took down part of the backyard fence. If you have time." The message was simple, practical, but it stirred that familiar knot in my stomach. This was turning into a habit, these calls for help that felt like invitations disguised as necessities. I texted back that I'd come by after my last job, around dusk, giving myself the afternoon to wrestle with the unease. Why did I keep saying yes? She was older, more settled, and crossing that line, whatever it was, felt like inviting complications I wasn't equipped for. But the pull was there, quiet and insistent, like gravity. Dusk fell early that evening, the sky a moody gray blanket threatening more rain as I parked in her driveway. She met me at the door in a light wool jacket over a simple blouse, her dark hair pulled back, accentuating the subtle lines of fatigue around her eyes, lines that placed her around 39, a reminder of the years between us that both intimidated and intrigued me. "You're a lifesaver, as always," she said, her voice carrying that steady warmth, though her smile seemed a touch strained, like she was holding something back. We walked around to the backyard, where a hefty maple branch had splintered the wooden fence, boards cracked and sagging like broken bones. "Tried to brace it myself," she explained, pointing, "but it's heavier than it looks." I knelt to inspect, pulling out my saw and a bundle of nails. "I'll reinforce the posts and swap out the damaged slats. Won't be long." As I worked, sawing through the jagged wood and hammering in supports, she didn't leave like before. Instead, she sat on a nearby stone bench, wrapping her jacket tighter against the cooling air, and offered a thermos of hot apple cider. "To fend off the chill," she said, her eyes following my movements. We talked in fits and starts, the changing leaves, a book she'd just finished about lost explorers, my parents' nagging calls from Hartford urging me back to school. "They're not wrong," she said gently, sipping from her own cup. "You've got potential, Nolan. Don't let it slip away on endless fixes." Her words hit a nerve, exposing my own doubts. "Maybe," I said, pounding a nail with more force than needed, the echo sharp in the evening quiet. "But school's not my thing. I like this, making things whole again." She watched me steadily, the fading light casting long shadows across the yard. "Some things don't fix so easily, like regrets or empty spaces." The weight in her tone made me pause, hammer mid-swing. "What do you mean?" She looked toward the woods bordering her property, where twilight deepened the greens to near black. "Life, I suppose. Marriages that fall apart. Nights that stretch too long. You get used to it, but it wears on you." I set the tools down and joined her on the bench, close enough to feel the subtle warmth radiating from her, the scent of her lavender soap mixing with the earthy smell of impending rain. "You don't strike me as lonely," I said, though the lie tasted bitter. I could see it in the way she held herself, guarded yet yearning. Her faint smile didn't reach her eyes. "I am, more than I'd admit. The divorce, it changed everything. Trusting again feels like stepping off a cliff." I nodded, my own insecurities bubbling up. "I get that. My life's a patchwork. No direction, just surviving. Feels like everyone's ahead of me." She turned then, her hand resting on the bench inches from mine, her gaze searching. "You're young, Nolan. That's your advantage. Time to figure it out." The moment stretched, the age difference hanging between us like an invisible barrier, her composed maturity clashing with my raw uncertainty. A drop of rain splattered on the ground, then another, the wind whispering through the trees. "We should head in," I said, but my body didn't move, anchored by the intensity in her eyes. Instead, she reached out, her fingers lightly grazing my arm, sending a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "Why do you keep coming back, Nolan? It's not just the jobs, is it?" The question pierced the air, raw and direct, forcing me to confront what I'd been dodging. My pulse thrummed. "Because being here feels different. With you, it's like I can breathe easier." Her breath hitched, and she withdrew her hand, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. "I'm too old for this. For you. It wouldn't be right. Maybe not by everyone's rules, I said, my voice low, steady despite the storm building inside me. But it doesn't feel wrong to me. Rain began in earnest, fat drops drumming on the leaves, driving us to the porch in a hurried dash. We laughed breathlessly as we shook off the water inside, but the sound faded quickly, replaced by a charged silence. The power flickered, the storm gathering strength, and she busied herself lighting candles from a kitchen drawer. "Not again," she murmured, placing them around the living room, their flames dancing in the growing dark. She poured glasses of red wine from a bottle on the counter, handing me one as we settled on the couch. Closer now, the storm's roar muffling the outside world. Conversation turned deeper, her ex's betrayal with someone younger, leaving her questioning her worth. My fears of never measuring up, of drifting aimlessly. Her hand found mine in the candlelight, a tentative link that ignited sparks along my skin. "I shouldn't do this," she whispered, but her fingers intertwined with mine. "Why fight it?" I asked, turning to face her fully, our faces inches apart in the dim glow. "Because you'll move on. People always do." "I won't," I said, the words fierce in their sincerity. I leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. But she met me, our lips brushing softly at first, then deepening with a hunger born of shared isolation. Her hands tangled in my hair, mine resting on her waist, the kiss tasting of wine and unspoken needs. It was gentle yet urgent, a bridge across the gap we'd both felt. We broke apart, foreheads touching, breaths mingling. "This can't be," she said, voice trembling, but her body stayed close. "It's already happening," I replied. The power cut out completely, plunging us into intimate shadows lit only by candles. We talked through the night, wrapped in a throw blanket on the couch, sharing fragments of ourselves, her abandoned dreams of traveling Europe,